HOA tried to take my spot, but I had the legal power to stop them dead in their tracks. I thought it was just another typical morning, sipping my coffee, when I saw her, the HOA president, walking up to my car with that fake smile. "There's been a little issue with your parking spot." But what she didn't know was that I owned more than just that spot. What happened next? They never saw it coming. Stay tuned to find out how I turned the tables on them. Welcome to HOA Secrets Uncovered, where we reveal the hidden truths of what happens behind those closed HOA doors. I'm Mark, and I've been living in this peaceful suburban neighborhood for years. You know, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. But sometimes, behind that picture-perfect lawn, there's a lot more going on than you'd ever expect. And that's exactly what happened to me. So sit back, grab some popcorn, and get ready for a story that will make you think twice before trusting your HOA. Let's dive in. The day started just like any other. I was sipping my coffee in the quiet of my kitchen, staring out the window at my perfectly kept lawn. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden light across the street, when I saw her, the HOA president. She was walking toward my car. And that smile of hers, I swear, it looked more like a smirk. I knew something was off. You don't get a smile like that from someone in charge of the HOA unless something's about to go down. I watched her approach. My stomach tightened, not from fear, but from something else. A sense of dread, of inevitability. Something was about to happen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all about to get messy. She stopped right in front of me, and for a second, I thought she might just walk by. But no, she planted herself right there, in front of my driveway, blocking my view out of the street. "I need to talk to you about something," she said, her voice sweet but with an edge to it. "It's about your parking spot." I raised an eyebrow. My parking spot? I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just a spot in front of my house, a place where I had parked my car for years. I'd never had a problem with it. But there she was, standing like she had the right to tell me how to live my life. "What about it?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though I was already sensing the storm brewing. "Well," she looked at me like she had all the time in the world to explain. "It seems your parking spot is a little problematic." I stared at her, unsure of how to respond. Problematic? There was nothing wrong with my parking spot. I had been parking there for years without a single complaint. The street was wide enough, and I followed every other rule the HOA had set. This didn't make sense. "Problematic? What do you mean?" I asked, my voice more skeptical now. She gave a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, according to our recent review of parking spaces in the neighborhood, we've noticed some violations. Yours is one of them." "Violations? What violations?" I was getting frustrated now. "There's a rule. It's in the HOA handbook," she said, pulling a small booklet from her bag and flipping through it. "The parking spots need to be a minimum of 3 feet away from the driveway. And your spot? Well, it's just a little too close." I looked at her, trying to process her words. 3 feet? I had parked there forever. There were no signs, no warnings, nothing. This was the first time I was hearing about it. She continued, "We've had several complaints, and the board has decided that your spot needs to be moved. You'll have to park somewhere else from now on." My jaw nearly dropped. "What?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're telling me I have to move my parking spot for something I've been doing for years?" "Exactly," she nodded, like she was doing me a favor. "The board has made its decision, and there's nothing to be done about it." I couldn't hide my disbelief. "This is ridiculous. There's no way I'm moving my car for something so stupid. This is my spot, and no one has ever said anything about it before. Why now?" Her smile faded, and she looked at me like I was a child. "Rules are rules, and as much as you may want to ignore them, they apply to everyone, even you." At that moment, I felt something in me snap. I had always followed the rules. I had always kept my lawn neat, my mailbox the right height, my trash bins out on time. But now, this was petty. This was personal. "Fine," I said through clenched teeth. "We'll see about that." She turned to walk away, but not before leaving me with a parting shot. "Expect a letter from the board. We'll be sending it soon, and it'll have all the details." As she walked away, I stood there, my hands shaking. I couldn't believe this was happening. My mind raced as I tried to figure out how I had gotten here. How something as simple as a parking spot had turned into an HOA nightmare. It was like a slow burn inside me, a rising anger. That she and her board thought they could push me around like this. But I wasn't going to just accept it. No way. I spent the rest of the day seething. Every time I walked outside, I could see her face in my mind. Her smug smile, like she had all the power in the world. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing how much this bothered me, but I couldn't help it. I was livid. That night I sat at my kitchen table, going through the HOA handbook, trying to find anything that might help me, anything that could give me a way to fight back. I had no intention of letting them take my spot. And I wasn't going to just roll over for them. The next day, I reached out to a lawyer. I needed to know my rights, because this was far from over. And I wasn't going to stop until I got my revenge. I didn't expect what came next. After that morning, everything seemed to change. The sun had barely set, and I was already pacing around my living room, waiting for the letter. It felt like it was taking forever. The silence in my house was deafening. All I could think about was how ridiculous this situation had become. It was just a parking spot, right? But for some reason, it felt like I was fighting for my life. As the hours passed, I kept glancing at my front door, waiting for that letter, but it never came. It wasn't until the next day, late in the afternoon, that I heard a knock. I opened the door, and there it was. The letter, official looking, with the HOA seal stamped across the top. I ripped it open, and as I read the contents, my frustration only grew. "You are hereby notified of a violation of the community parking rules as per Section 14, Paragraph 3 of the HOA guidelines." I skimmed the rest, trying to make sense of what was being said. It felt like they were reading me my rights, like I had committed some criminal act by parking where I had for years. The letter was full of technical jargon, pointing out my non-compliance with the parking distance, but none of it made sense. How could something so minor turn into such a big deal? I sat down, rubbing my temples. This wasn't just about a spot anymore. This was about power. The HOA president and her little army of board members wanted to control everything. They wanted to take my spot, make an example out of me. As I read through the letter again, I caught something that made my blood run cold. Failure to comply within 10 days will result in further fines and possible legal action. I threw the letter down on the coffee table, my hands shaking. Legal action? For a parking spot? It felt like I was living in some twisted sitcom, but everything was real, and I wasn't laughing. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, I could see the other houses in the neighborhood. Everyone was going about their business, living their lives, while I was stuck in this mess. I couldn't let them push me around, not over something so petty. And that's when it hit me. I had to play this game their way. If they wanted to drag me into their world of rules and regulations, I would do it better than they ever could. I didn't have to fight back with anger or force. No, I would fight with their own game. I would follow every single rule to the letter. The next morning, I went out and started measuring my parking space. I had a tape measure in my hand and a determined look on my face. I wasn't going to give them any excuse to claim I was breaking the rules. I spent the next few days reading every line of the HOA handbook. And let me tell you, I was shocked at how many petty rules there were. Everything from lawn height to mailbox colors, they had it all covered. The more I read, the more ridiculous it seemed. But there was one thing that stood out: the power they had over people's lives. I thought about my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, who always had the perfect lawn. Every time the HOA came around, they complimented him. And then there was Mrs. Foster, who lived 3 doors down. Her mailbox was the perfect shade of blue, a shade they recommended, of course. But not everyone got the same treatment. Some people didn't follow the rules to a T, and they were never called out. I had seen it with my own eyes. There was a clear bias in the way the HOA operated, and I wasn't going to be their next victim. I started with the basics, following every rule to the letter. My lawn? Perfect. My mailbox? Spot on. And as for my parking spot, I made sure it was exactly 3 feet from the driveway. I wanted to be so perfect that they couldn't find a single thing wrong. But it didn't stop there. I went through every single violation they had ever written about, making sure I was in full compliance with everything. The more I read, the more I realized how easily the HOA could manipulate the rules to suit their own agenda. They had too much power. They could decide what color your house was painted, how tall your fence could be, and even what kind of grass you could have in your yard. But it didn't seem like the rules were really about keeping the neighborhood nice. It felt more like a way for them to control people. I wasn't going to let that happen. After a week of being the perfect neighbor, I started to notice something strange. The HOA hadn't sent any more letters. The board members weren't knocking on my door. In fact, I hadn't seen the HOA president at all. It was almost like they had forgotten about me. But then I saw her again, standing on the sidewalk across the street. She was talking to a few of the other neighbors, giving them that same smile. I knew something was about to happen, but I wasn't sure what. The next morning, there was a loud knock at my door. I opened it slowly, and there she was again, the HOA president. But this time, she wasn't smiling. "I've been keeping an eye on you," she said, her voice cold. "You think you've won, don't you?" I didn't say anything. I just stood there, waiting for her next words. "Don't get too comfortable," she added, her eyes narrowing. "You may have played by the rules, but we have other ways of making you comply." I could feel my heart race as she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing on the pavement. I knew then the real battle had only just begun. The silence in my house had become unbearable. It was like I was holding my breath, waiting for the next move. And then the knock came. I had just finished fixing my perfectly aligned mailbox when I heard it. A hard, loud knock at my front door. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. It was her, the HOA president. She had that look in her eyes, the look of someone who was ready to put an end to this little game of mine. When I opened the door, she wasted no time. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without asking for permission. I wasn't about to argue. Not yet, anyway. "About what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but I could already feel my blood starting to boil. She crossed her arms, her eyes cold. "You think just because you've followed every rule, you're going to get away with it?" Her voice was sharp, but there was a hint of something else, something almost dangerous. I shrugged, playing it cool. I'm just doing what the handbook says. If that's a problem, maybe the board should take another look at their own rules." She sneered at me. "Don't be smart. We both know the rules aren't the issue. It's about the bigger picture, the control." I paused. "Control?" She went on, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're not just fighting for a parking spot, you know. You're challenging us. And that's something we don't take lightly." I felt a chill run down my spine. There it was. She wasn't just after my parking spot. She was after something bigger. Before I could respond, she handed me an envelope, the kind that looked official, the kind that made your stomach turn when you saw it. I took it from her, my hands shaking. "Consider this a warning," she said, her eyes narrowing. "If you don't comply, the consequences will be far worse than a parking ticket." I didn't open the envelope right away. Instead, I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words pressing on me. This wasn't just about parking anymore. This was personal. She turned and walked out, leaving me standing in my doorway, staring at the envelope in my hand. My mind raced. What had I gotten myself into? I had started this as a simple act of defiance, a way to stand up to the HOA. But now it felt like I was walking into something I wasn't ready for. I stepped back inside and sat down at my kitchen table, the envelope still unopened in front of me. I felt the need to breathe deeply, to calm my racing heart. But it wasn't easy. What if this was the beginning of something much worse? I opened the envelope slowly, carefully. Inside, there was a letter. A legal-looking letter. I skimmed through it quickly, my eyes widening with each word I read. "You are hereby notified of further violations related to your parking space. Failure to comply within 5 days will result in a court hearing and potential fines." It wasn't just a warning. It was an ultimatum. The letter went on to explain that the HOA board had reviewed my case and had decided that my parking spot violated multiple rules, not just the distance from the driveway, but also the flow of traffic in the neighborhood. According to them, my spot was now officially in violation of the community's traffic safety standards. It didn't make sense. Traffic safety? There was no traffic. This was a quiet cul-de-sac. But what did make sense was that the HOA was not backing down, and neither was I. I spent the next few hours stewing over what to do. Part of me wanted to rip the letter up and throw it in her face, but I knew that would only make things worse. The other part of me, the part that wanted justice, knew I had to hit back, but I had to be smart about it. I couldn't afford to make mistakes now. I needed a plan. A strategy that would not only win me back my parking spot, but would also show the HOA that they couldn't just walk all over me. The first thing I did was dig into the HOA handbook again. I had to find some loopholes, and sure enough, I found one. It was buried deep in the rules, something about grandfathered rights for longtime residents. I had lived in this neighborhood for over 10 years. If I was right, I could use that to my advantage. I wasn't just going to sit there and let them destroy me with their petty rules. I was going to fight back. Legally, I reached out to a lawyer, someone who knew the ins and outs of HOA battles. I needed to know if I had a case, if I could challenge them. The lawyer took a look at my situation and said something that made my blood run cold. "Get ready for a fight, because they're not going to back down. But if you're willing to go all the way, you can win." The words echoed in my mind as I prepared for the battle that was about to unfold. This wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't going to back down. Not now, not after everything I had already sacrificed. The days that followed were filled with tension. I spent hours on the phone with my lawyer, gathering evidence, reviewing documents, and preparing for the showdown that was coming. The HOA wasn't going to know what hit them. But there was one thing I couldn't shake. The way she had looked at me. It was like she knew something I didn't. What was her next move? And was I ready for it? The feeling of the HOA president's eyes on me never left. It was like a shadow lurking in the corner of my mind, waiting to pounce at any moment. I had been pusses at too far, and now I was determined to push back. But the problem was, I had no idea what I was up against. My lawyer, Mr. Daniels, had warned me that the HOA wasn't going to just let me go. These people had power. Power I hadn't even realized until now. They weren't just a bunch of neighbors trying to keep things neat. No, the HOA was an organization, a force with its own agenda, and it was clear now that I wasn't just fighting for a parking spot anymore. This was about standing up to the system that had been quietly running things for years. I spent hours in my living room going over the HOA handbook again and again, making sure I didn't miss a single detail. It felt like I was preparing for a war, and in a way I was. Each rule, each tiny clause, was a weapon in my hands. I wasn't going to let them win because they thought they could bully me with their nonsense. I was going to fight back, and fight dirty if I had to. I made the first move. I sent the HOA a formal letter, stating my case clearly. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I wasn't going to just take their threats lying down. I'd followed the rules, and now they were going to see that I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself. I didn't just write about my rights. I made sure to cite specific laws, the ones about grandfathered rights for long-term residents like myself. If they wanted to play dirty, I could do the same. It was an adrenaline rush, I won't lie. Sending that letter felt like I was taking back control. But the next day, I received a response that nearly made me drop my coffee. The letter was from their lawyer, and it was worse than I could have imagined. Further action is being taken. Failure to comply will result in an official hearing and additional penalties. The audacity! They didn't even acknowledge the points I'd raised in my letter. Instead, they were doubling down. I felt like I had entered a nightmare, a game where the rules were made up as they went along. But now, I was too deep into this to back out. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not without a fight. It was clear now that this wasn't just about the parking spot. They were testing me, pushing me, trying to see if I had the guts to take them on. The board, the president, the lawyer, they were all in on it. It was a game of power, and they wanted to see if I was weak enough to fold. But here's the thing about power. You can't take it from someone who knows how to use it. I had been calm up until now. I had played their game, tried to follow every rule to the letter. But now, it was time to stop being nice. It was time to flip the script. I reached out to some of my neighbors. I'd spent years keeping to myself, not getting involved in the neighborhood politics, but I needed to find out if anyone else was as tired of the HOA's nonsense as I was. I started with Mr. Thompson, the guy who always had his lawn perfect. I thought he'd be a stickler for the rules, but to my surprise, he was more than willing to talk. He'd been dealing with the HOA for years, and guess what? They'd given him trouble over things like his lawn edging and mailbox position. "It's like they just pick on you for anything," he said, shaking his head. "They don't care about the rules. They just want control." That was the moment I realized I wasn't alone. I spoke to Mrs. Foster, who lived a few doors down. She'd been involved in a few HOA disputes herself. She had fought the HOA over a shed they claimed she didn't have permission for. She was outraged, but she fought back and won. She told me, "They're not used to people standing up to them. If you fight back, they'll back off." That was exactly what I needed to hear. If I was going to do this, I needed backup. I started gathering evidence from my neighbors. They all had stories, complaints, and frustrations with the HOA. I wasn't just fighting for my parking spot anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced or ignored by the HOA board. I couldn't do this alone. I needed a united front. And the more I heard, the more I realized that this wasn't just about a petty rule violation. This was about the HOA overstepping its bounds, overusing its power, and bullying the people it was supposed to serve. I wasn't going to let them continue to get away with it. Not this time. The next step was clear. I had to take this to the next level. I couldn't just send letters anymore. I couldn't just sit back and wait for them to respond. I was going to hit them where it hurt. I was going to gather a petition, rally my neighbors, and get the support I needed to take this to court. And so, I started drafting the petition. But this wasn't just a simple petition. It was a declaration. A declaration that we were done being pushed around. We were done letting the HOA tell us how to live our lives. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but when I handed out that petition, I saw something in the eyes of my neighbors that gave me hope. They weren't just signing a piece of paper. They were signing up for something bigger. They were signing up for justice. And that's when I realized the truth. This wasn't just about a parking spot. It was about fighting for what's right. I was ready. Ready to take this fight to the next level. But what happened next? I wasn't prepared for it. No one could have seen it coming. I had gathered my neighbors, compiled my evidence, and gotten everything in order. We were ready to present our case. We had the petition. We had the stories. We had the truth on our side. The HOA didn't stand a chance, or so I thought. The day before we were supposed to file the petition, I was sitting in my living room, flipping through the papers one last time. I felt confident, maybe too confident. I had been on the offense for weeks, every move calculated, every word precise. The board was about to hear from me, and I was sure they wouldn't know what hit them. And then it happened. The knock. It was late. The evening was quiet, and I'd almost forgotten about it, when suddenly there it was, a sharp knock at my door. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone, not this late. I stood up, cautious, and peeked through the peephole. It was her, the HOA president. I didn't know whether to feel relief or dread, but I wasn't going to back down now. I opened the door, my jaw set. She was standing there, looking just as smug as ever. But this time, there was something different about her, a certain glint in her eyes. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice soft but with an edge I hadn't heard before. I took a deep breath, keeping my composure. "What about?" She stepped closer, glancing over her shoulder as if she was making sure no one could overhear. "About your little petition." I froze. How did she know about that? "You see," she continued, "I wasn't expecting this from you, but I guess we all have our breaking points, don't we?" I didn't say anything. I just stood there, waiting. I didn't trust her, or not for a second. She gave a half smile. "I know what you're thinking, that you're going to win, that you have the truth on your side. But what you don't realize is that the HOA, well, we don't just follow the rules, we make them." My heart sank. I had been so sure. This was supposed to be a fight about justice, about standing up to them. But now it was starting to feel like something else, something darker. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You've made this personal. And trust me, it's not a battle you want to fight. You think you can just win with your little petition and your neighborly support. But you're wrong." I didn't respond, but my mind was racing. What was she saying? What did she mean by that? She stepped back, holding up a small envelope. I could see the same seal on it, The HOA seal. "This," she said, "is your real issue." She handed it to me, her eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite place. Without saying another word, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with the envelope in my hand. I watched her disappear into the night, my mind spinning. I opened the envelope quickly, barely able to hold my hand steady. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper. I read it, and my blood ran cold. It was a legal notice, but not just any legal notice. This was something far worse than a violation for a parking spot. "You are hereby notified of a lawsuit for defamation of character and malicious intent against the HOA. You will be held responsible for any damages caused by your actions, and failure to comply will result in further legal consequences. Please consider this your final warning." My head was spinning. Defamation? Malicious intent? How could they do this? It was all a game, a tactic to scare me into backing down. But I wasn't going to let them. This was no longer just about a parking spot. This was about them trying to destroy me, trying to make me disappear quietly. I had to act fast. The letter was a threat, no doubt, but it also meant something more. They were scared. They were trying to make me afraid, to make me fold. I wasn't going to let them, not now. I called my lawyer immediately. Mr. Daniels picked up after the third ring, sounding groggy but alert when he heard my voice. "Listen to me," I said, my voice urgent. "I need you to look at something right now. I've got a legal notice from the HOA, and it's not about the parking. It's something else. Something bigger." I could hear him shuffling papers on his end as he read the letter. He was quiet for a moment, then spoke slowly. "This is bad, but not the end of the world. They're trying to scare you into backing off. This is a common tactic, especially when someone's standing up to them. But don't worry, we can fight this." I wasn't relieved. Not yet. But what do I do now? What's the next step? He paused, then gave me a plan. We were going to counter their move. We would file a countersuit. I would fight them every step of the way. But there was one thing I couldn't shake. Why had they done this? Why had they escalated things so quickly? What were they hiding? And more importantly, what were they planning next? The next few days were a blur. It felt like my whole world had shifted in an instant. One moment, I was fighting for a parking spot. The next, I was caught in the middle of a full-scale war. The HOA wasn't just playing games anymore. They had stepped up their tactics, and I could feel the pressure mounting with every passing hour. The legal notice was just the beginning. They weren't backing down. In fact, it felt like they were digging their heels in deeper, trying to force me into submission. The thought of losing everything, of letting them win, was too much. But I couldn't back down now, not after everything that had happened. I had a strategy, a plan. But as I sat at my kitchen table, going over everything one more time, I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger. It was about the neighborhood, the people who had been living under the thumb of the HOA for years, too afraid to speak up. But now, I wasn't alone. I had my neighbors behind me, and together, we were going to take this fight to the next level. It all came to a head when I received a call from my lawyer, Mr. Daniels, early one morning. His voice was tense. "We need to talk," he said. "It's about the court hearing. It's going to happen sooner than we expected." The date was set. The HOA had officially filed their lawsuit against me for defamation, and the judge had agreed to move forward with the case. But here's the kicker. The HOA president, the one who had been pulling all the strings, was now going to testify against me. She had made it personal, and I was ready to make her regret it. "Prepare yourself," Mr. Daniels warned. This is going to be one hell of a fight. I wasn't scared, not anymore. But as the hearing day drew closer, I began to feel a sense of unease settle in the pit of my stomach. The reality of the situation hit me hard. This wasn't just some petty argument about a parking spot anymore. This was real life. This was the kind of thing that could ruin reputations, ruin lives. But I had no choice. I had to push forward. The morning of the court hearing arrived, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I was sitting in the lawyer's office, reviewing the case one final time, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Mrs. Foster, one of my neighbors. "Have you seen what the HOA put up at the community center? It's a flyer. It's about you, and it's not good." My heart sank. What were they doing now? I quickly excused myself and left the office, heading straight to the community center. When I got there, I couldn't believe what I saw. The flyer was huge, almost like a poster, and in big, bold letters, it read, "Warning, homeowner defying the rules. This homeowner has repeatedly violated community rules. His actions could affect everyone's property values and the quality of life in the neighborhood." The flyer had my name on it, my face, and the words. They were designed to make me look like the villain. The worst part? They had included details about the lawsuit and the damage I was supposedly causing the neighborhood. They were trying to turn the entire community against me. I stood there stunned. How had they managed to pull something like this off? I had never expected them to go this far. But then it hit me. They were scared. They were trying to rally the neighborhood against me, hoping to get everyone on their side before the hearing even started. They were playing dirty. I wasn't going to let that happen. I immediately called my lawyer, but he already knew. "This is part of their strategy," he said. "They're trying to sway public opinion, but it won't work. You've got the facts on your side. You've got your neighbors. And most importantly, you've got the truth." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. It was time to fight back. I wasn't going to let them turn the tables on me. Not this time. The day of the hearing arrived, and as I walked into the courtroom, I could feel the tension in the air. The courtroom was packed, and as I looked around, I saw the faces of my neighbors. They had hewn up to support me, and that gave me strength. But when I saw the HOA president standing there with her smug smile, I felt a surge of anger. She was confident, too confident, like she already knew the outcome of this fight. But I wasn't about to let her win. The hearing started, and the first few hours were spent with lawyers making their cases. The HOA's lawyer went on and on about how I had disrupted the peace of the neighborhood, how my actions had caused irreparable damage to property values. It sounded ridiculous. The more they talked, the more I realized how empty their accusations were. Then it was my turn. My lawyer stood up and called me to the stand. I took a deep breath, walked to the witness chair, and looked out at the jury and at the faces of my neighbors. I had their support, and I wasn't going to let them down. I started by calmly explaining the situation, how I had been living in the neighborhood for years, how I had always followed the rules, and how this whole mess had started over something as trivial as a parking spot. I showed the court the evidence, the petition, the HOA handbook, the legal documents. Everything was in order. And then I dropped the bombshell. I pulled out a copy of the flyer the HOA had posted at the community center. I placed it on the table, letting everyone see the smear campaign they had launched against me. I pointed out how they had tried to manipulate the entire neighborhood to turn against me. The room fell silent. It was clear now. The HOA had been playing dirty, trying to destroy my reputation before I even had a chance to speak my truth. But the truth had a way of coming out in the end. As I finished my testimony, I felt the shift in the room. The judge's expression had changed. The jury was taking notes. And when I looked at the HOA president, I saw the smugness slowly disappear from her face. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. It was a week after the hearing, and things had been quiet, too quiet. The HOA president and her board had been strangely silent, and I found myself wondering if I'd already won. But there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something else. Something I wasn't prepared for. I'd been living in this neighborhood for years, following the rules, being a good neighbor, and all it took was one small challenge to set everything on fire. But now I had everything to lose. I woke up early one morning, the sun still low in the sky, when I heard a knock on my door. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be? I hadn't heard from my lawyer in a few days, and I couldn't get the silence out of my head. I opened the door, and there she was, the HOA president. I should have been surprised, but I wasn't. At this point, I'd learned that nothing with her ever came without some kind of game attached. She stood there, holding a thick folder in her hands, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm but with an underlying sharpness that told me this was not going to be an ordinary conversation. I didn't even bother to invite her inside. "What do you want?" I asked, crossing my arms, ready for whatever move she was going to make next. She held up the folder and shook it slowly, like she had a secret weapon inside. "You've made things personal," she said, "but I think you'll find that the rules apply to everyone, even you." I felt my heart race. What was she talking about? She opened the folder and handed me a few papers. The words blurred for a moment, but then I saw it. There it was. The official letter, with the HOA's seal on it, stating that I had been violating multiple community guidelines and had caused irreparable harm to the community. But then came the kicker. A court date. They were going to escalate this further. They were taking me to court again, this time for damages. They were suing me. My mind raced. How could this be happening? They couldn't just do this. Not after everything I'd already been through. They were going to use everything I'd said, every action I'd taken, as ammunition to destroy me. But I wasn't about to back down. Not after everything I'd fought for. I looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and resolve. "You think you can scare me with this?" I said, holding up the paper. "You think I'm going to just roll over and give up?" Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't just about a parking spot anymore. This is about sending a message. You've challenged us, and now we're going to make sure you never forget who has the real power in this neighborhood." She turned to leave, but before she walked away, she glanced over her shoulder, a smug smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Good luck. You're going to need it." And just like that, she was gone. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the door. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and I could feel the anger rising in my chest. They thought they could break me. But they were wrong. I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not after everything I'd been through. I had to keep fighting. I had to take this all the way to the end. I called Mr. Daniels immediately. The case had taken another ugly turn, and I needed his advice. He answered on the second ring. "What happened?" he asked, sounding tense. "They're suing me," I said, my voice tight. "For damages. They're trying to bleed me dry." He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Just let the words sink in. Finally, he spoke. "All right. This changes things. But it's not over. You've got a strong case, and now we need to prepare for round 2. I spent the rest of the day pacing around, collecting every bit of evidence I could find. I wasn't just fighting for my parking spot anymore. This was personal. The HOA had pushed me too far, and now I was going to hit them where it hurt. But I needed something more than just legal tactics. I needed a strategy. something they didn't see coming. I made a few calls, reaching out to some of my neighbors. I needed their help, their voices, their stories. The HOA had made it clear that they were willing to destroy anyone who stood in their way. But if we stood together, they couldn't break us. One by one, I gathered statements from my neighbors, people who had been silenced by the HOA for years. I even got a few anonymous tips about other shady practices the HOA had been involved in. Things they didn't want anyone to know. Things that could turn the case in our favor. When the day of the court hearing finally arrived, I was ready. It was no longer just about me. It was about all of us, all the neighbors who had been pushed around, all the families who had lived in fear of the HOA's power trips. We were going to stand up together. I walked into the courtroom, my head held high, knowing that I wasn't facing this alone. The HOA president and her lawyer were sitting across from me, smug smiles plastered on their faces. But this time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt something else. Something stronger. The hearing started, and the HOA's lawyer began with the usual arguments. The same old claims about violations, about how my actions had caused irreparable damage. But this time, I didn't let them control the conversation. I stood up, calmly but with purpose, and presented my evidence. I showed the court the flyers they'd posted around the neighborhood. I showed the board members' bias and the shady dealings I had uncovered. I presented everything: the petition, the legal documents, the testimonies from my neighbors. And finally, I called my neighbors to the stand. They were brave enough to speak out, and I was proud of them. As the final arguments were made, I could see the change in the room. The judge was listening. The jury was paying attention. The tables had turned. When the judge called for a recess, I stepped outside into the hall, feeling like I had just fought a battle. But the war wasn't over yet. The next few days would decide everything.